Hey there, folks, friends. Joshua Baumgarten here from the Irrational Library. Today I want to start something new, and that's doing some short interviews with the fine people here in Haarlemtown who facilitate our cultural events, the pop podiums, the bars, the cafes, and the horeca undernemers, people who run those fine bars and cafes and places where we all get to hang out and have a good time. Or at least we did up until a few months ago when this whole coronavirus thing started. I just want to talk with them, find out what life was like before the corona, during the corona, and now at this period where we're sort of, well, are we coming out of it, or are we just sort of moving in a prolonged state of being? So today we're going to visit Fay from the Wolfhound, and I hope you join us, sit through, and listen to what she has to say. All right. So, can you please tell everybody who you are and where we're at?
I can. My name is Fay MacCorquodale-Smith. We are in the Wolfhound Irish Bar and Kitchen. That's the bar I own together with my husband.
Where's Wolfhound located in Haarlem?
Haarlem on the Rivier Vismarkt, so that's right in the centre, opposite the big church, the Bafo.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Fay.
Pleasure.
What I'd like to do today is sort of talk about what the role of the Wolfhound was in Haarlem, the culture and horeca life, the going out life, say pre-corona, during the corona time, or the intelligent lockdown, and now. The cafes and bars have been open since the beginning of the month. We're now in the month of June 2020, and how that's affected you as a business, but also as a person. What is the role of Wolfhound in the cultural horeca life here in Haarlem?
I'll go back to then before lockdown, before Corona. We are very focused on culture of I can't. I cannot find the words. Any form of cultural expression, really. We, myself and my husband, and the rest of the staff as well, we are really into music, live music especially. And so we host a lot of live gigs, from singer-songwriters to full-on rock bands. We have a few recurring evenings that we have. For example, every month we'll have a jazz evening with usually young jazz musicians who put on a brilliant gig. It's been brilliant so far every time, for 1 hour, and then after that there's a jazz session that usually continues on till like 3, sometimes 4 o'clock in the morning. We have open mic poetry nights with your good self as our host. We do a folk session where everybody just joins in and plays traditional songs, sings, does whatever. So all kinds of music, all kinds of forms of art, cultural expressions, and we used to do that 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, and I've always found it amazing and also heartwarming to see that there's so much interest for that, especially among the young crowd here in Haarlem, for nearly everything we do. So yeah, that's us. That's our little part in the cultural nightlife of Haarlem.
And since I believe the evening of the first press conference from the overhead from Rutte was on the night that we had
the last poetry night.
Poets of Haarlemtown
Yeah.
Underground and Wolfhound here. And then since then, what has been occurring here in the Wolfhound?
Since then, well, the few days after that were mad. We really couldn't have foreseen what was coming. At least I don't think we could have. Sunday evening, the 15th, there was another press conference announced, so I made sure to be at home to see the press conference because surely something important was going to be announced. And then there at about 5:30, they announced that all bars and restaurants had to be closed that day by 6 o'clock. So that's what we had to do. We had 25 minutes to get all the guests out. We were full. People had just ordered dinner, it was just before 6 o'clock. And we had to announce, sorry, but our Prime Minister has just told us we have to kick you out. So that was mad. Luckily, all our lovely guests were very understanding, but it felt really wrong to do. But anyway, that happened. Then we were closed. At first, it was going to be until April 6th, if I remember correctly, so about 3 weeks. Then, as we all know now, that became another month, and then in the end, we were closed for 2.5 months until June 1st. We did not do takeaway or delivery or anything like that while we were closed. We didn't feel it suits our business, and it wasn't really financially viable. So that wasn't. We never really considered that a real option. So we didn't do that. I myself have been incredibly busy the past 2.5 months, from day one to, of course, just organize everything to make sure we can pay our staff and to just keep the business afloat, because we've 15 members of staff who we really value and who we wanted to make sure that we were able to pay out.
Did you continue paying them salary while it was closed?
Yes.
Is that something that was a personal choice, or is that something that is sort of verplicht from the government?
A little bit from column A, a little bit from column B.
Okay.
There are ways around it, of course. I've heard from businesses who have laid off all their staff. There are other paths you can choose to take, I'm sure. But we wanted to make sure to look after them as best we could. Like I said, we really value them, and I really mean that. And also we were, from the very beginning of the lockdown, convinced that we would reopen, and we wanted to make sure to reopen with the same team. And also just, it's just the right thing to do morally, as long as we could anyway. I wanted to pay them. They also have rent to pay, and there was part of it is mandatory, of course. It's not just any choice. They are on contract. The law does state that under these conditions we had to pay them out. What was it? The average number of hours that they would have worked in the 3 months previous to lockdown. So that would be the amount of money that they got. So there are certain parts that are mandatory, and that's what we stuck to. But
how is that as a financial burden upon an establishment that is at the same time paying people out but not bringing any money in? How does that work?
Not great. No, so far so good. But there were quite a few promises done by our government quite early on that made me and my husband feel a little bit of relief. Like, okay, there is going to be some financial support, but there were a lot of promises made that quickly turned out to be at least partial truths, to put it nicely. For example, there was the promise that there was going to be financial aid towards paying your staff. You were supposed to get back 90% of the money that you spend on staff, and in reality that's turning out to be about 75%. So at least, I'm happy we're getting something back. But I do not like false promises.
How do you feel that the lockdown affected your community, your customers? Did you get feedback from them while you were closed, or yeah? Just I'm curious about that.
Yeah, well, we haven't been in touch with all our regular guests, of course, but we have heard from quite a few that we stayed in touch with, through social media, messaging on Facebook, and some via WhatsApp and other means, that people were really missing just the normality, just the day-to-day, coming in after work, sitting down at the bar, having a chat, having a pint. Because of course we could still, in our form of lockdown, we could still go to the supermarket and buy a can of Guinness, which is not nearly as good. It's not really an option, but you can buy a bottle of Heineken instead of a draft Heineken. And we've all got familiar with Zoom and all the other ways of video chatting, but it's not the same. It's not the same, and I've heard from a lot of people that's what they've really missed, the social connecting with people, because it's a different thing to sit down with a beer in your home and chat to someone. You have to decide, okay, I'm going to get in touch with this person. You also need their contact details. You can't just log on and see who's, well, they're chat rooms, of course, but different thing. But you can't just sit down at the bar, have a chat with the bartender. We didn't have our bartenders on standby in case any regular guest might want to have a chat, Would have been a good idea, maybe.
Or the bartender tapping beer behind it.
Yeah. But little things like that, just casual conversation with someone who's also there with you at the bar who you might not even know. That's what I've heard from a lot of people that they've really missed. People have also commented on our burgers and our spare ribs that they've missed that, which is nice to hear, of course. But they weren't really the big things. From others, a few I've heard as well, just people around me, staff, regulars. Some people got really, really depressed. Some got really paranoid. So yeah, it's affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways, I think. At the same time, it's affected, from what I can tell, a lot of people in exactly the same way. We've missed normality, we've missed social interaction. Yeah. Even those of us who think, oh, I hate people. It's not true. You missed them, didn't you?
You gotta be around them to hate them.
Exactly.
So let's fast forward a little bit to the present day, or to the beginning of the month. That'd be June 2020, when the Dutch government decided that it was safe enough to start reopening bars, cafes, but with limitations.
Yes.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit how the reopening, building up to a reopening, the reopening, and what are the pluses and the minuses of being able to run a business again at this period?
Well, first of all, we're happy, of course, that we can reopen, that we have a little bit of the normality back. The Guinness drinkers among us are especially happy to have a proper pint again. But it's been very odd. It's been very, very strange. A lot to deal with, especially for the staff here on the floor, because the rules and restrictions, they're a lot for the hospitality sector. Excuse me. It's one thing to have to wear a mask in public transport. It might be a bit of an inconvenience, but so be it. But in especially this industry, it is called the hospitality industry. We have had to police people, which is very unnatural. I'll go through a couple of the restrictions, the rules that we have now. For example, there are only 30 people allowed in, max, at any given time. That's not including staff.
How do you keep track of that?
Well, we have only one entrance, and another rule is that reservations are mandatory. So we keep a list of reservations, and then it's well, I wouldn't say easy, but you can keep track of how many people you have inside, and that's that.
So someone can't just come walking in and want to sit at the bar and have a beer?
No. Well, no and yes. Because reservations can also be made at the door. So we have now a sign here on the bar. Well, we have two actually. We have one saying, please wait here to be seated. And another one with a checklist, with a health check, which is another thing. I'll get to that one. So people have to wait here to be seated, and then we can go over, do we actually have a seat available for you? We currently do not use these chairs at the bar because it's too hard to keep people apart. Another rule is everybody has to stay 1.5 meters apart, which is also why we have to work with a list of reservations to see which table we can and we can't use, because we can't use tables that are really close together. They have to be 1.5 meters apart. So it's a big puzzle the whole time. So people can come in and say, hello, I don't have a reservation yet, can I make one now? Then we can, but we have to count how many people do we have in, where are they seated, can we sit them, how many people are there? Because 2 people are allowed to sit at the same table, not having to stay 1.5 meters apart. 3 people are not allowed unless they are of the same household together. So if we get a reservation in or group in for 3 people or more, we have to ask them if they are one household. If not, they can be seated, for example, at 2 tables, 2 people on one table and 2 on the other if it's a group of 4. So there's a lot to keep track of. We actually need to have extra staff on at the minute to be able to do this, because you can imagine on, for example, a Friday night or a Saturday night when people want to go out, there's a constant influx of people here at the door, and so there has to be someone here manning the door constantly nearly, to keep track of who's allowed in, who's not allowed in, and if you're allowed in, then we have to go through another whole rigmarole. People have to disinfect their hands at the door first. They have to go through a whole checklist. We have to check if they, haven't been in contact with anybody with symptoms, yada yada yada.
So if you're allowed 30 people in at a time, and you have a capacity of how many customers on a normal?
Under normal circumstances, we have 90 seats. And then there's standing room, of course. I mean, if the seats at the bar are taken, usually people stand all around the bar.
So just say if you had only people in here sitting and eating, that's 90 people. So now you're working at a third, if my math is right, a fraction. A
third would be right.
A fraction of your capacity, but you also have to employ extra staff to be able to oversee and make sure all the rules are
Exactly.
followed.
Exactly.
And has there been any inspection? I'm not sure who handles that actually. The BOAs?
The BOAs, the handhaving. They haven't been inside yet, but we see them a lot on the street. We have to police the terrace as well, because the same rules apply there to a certain extent. Everybody does still have to keep the 1.5 meter distance. Not more than 2 people are allowed at the same table unless they share a household, but reservations aren't mandatory on the terrace. Unfortunately, under current circumstances, I've only room for 8 people under the terrace, so not much going on there.
And that must be interesting also with the roofverbod, with no smoking inside, that you have people coming in and out with smoking.
Yes. And we have to tell them they have to stand on the other side of the street to smoke, because they're not allowed to stand on the terrace, because you have to have a seat. Seats are mandatory for all guests.
Are they allowed to take their beer to the other side of the street?
No.
No. Interesting.
Oh, yes. Interesting is a very interesting way to put it.
So now you go not only from being a restaurateur and a provider of cultural events here in Haarlem, but you also have to be a babysitter.
Yes, well, mostly our floor staff handle most of that, but yeah, absolutely.
And have they been met with any sort of animosity from people, or how do the customers handle themselves?
Mostly, especially earlier on in the evening, mostly very understanding, because they know, of course, these aren't our rules. Yeah, we didn't come up with this. We don't do this to be dickheads. We do this because otherwise we can't be open at all. So they've been very understanding to a certain extent. You know, the atmosphere changes a little bit always when people have had a little bit to drink, which happens. We're a bar. And then later on in the evening, we still have to tell people, you have to stay in your seat, you can't just be walking around, you have to keep your distance. And then people get annoyed, and who are you to tell me this? And understandably so. Because, you know, inhibitions leave us, and people feel a little bit more free to say whatever they want when they've had a few, and then
It's very Dutch.
your words, not mine. I simply agree with.
Smart.
Yeah. So yeah, that happens, and it's understandable as well, because you don't go out to be told where to sit down. That's what you made your way through elementary school for, to not have to be told that anymore. And now suddenly here you are, someone comes in, 25 years of age, and is told to sit there. So that's what makes it very hard as well. It doesn't suit the industry. Like I've said before, it's called the hospitality industry, and most of this, the way we have to approach our guests now, does not feel like hospitality. It just doesn't. And that's a real shame. We're really happy to be open again, honestly. And all our staff are happy to be at work again as well. Because you don't go into this industry if you don't like it. You have to have a passion for this to do it, and they do, and so they're happy to be back as well. But the circumstances, it has to end pretty soon.
And what do you then brings us to the now, I guess. We're now in the middle of June, so you've been up and running, and you're having customers come back. You're pretty much at capacity most nights.
Yeah.
Great.
Luckily.
And what do you, hope for the future, not only as a restaurant, but also especially for the cultural scene, for the music scene, for all the people that you hosted here, myself included, with a number of different events, from the pub quiz and the poetry nights and stuff like that. Do you have any idea? I mean, because for people who are familiar with the Wolfhound, you know that downstairs they have a beautiful kelder, which is so perfect for such intimate events.
Yeah.
How are you handling that, foreseeing, strategizing, or thinking, well, it's just going to have to wait?
For now, it will have to wait. It really depends on what the government tells us we are and aren't allowed to do. Because under current circumstances, it's absolutely not viable for us with only 30 people allowed in the place. Well, for one, you wouldn't have a big crowd, but that's always something that can be overcome. But also, if we're only allowed 30 people in, then as a business owner, I have to say those 30 people have to be paying customers.
Yeah.
I can't also have one of the 30 be a musician who I have to pay a few €100 at the end of the night, which we do. I mean, people don't play here for free, and they shouldn't. You know, artists shouldn't do what they do just for free. That's a whole different discussion.
That'll be the part two.
Yeah. So yeah, currently we can't. Like you said, we're operating at a 25 to 30% capacity, while all the costs are the same. We still have to pay our rent. Taxes have been postponed, but postponed still means that they have to be paid eventually. Gas and electricity didn't get any cheaper, so the bills still need to have to be paid. Yet we are only generating 25 to 30% of our usual turnover. So we really have to handle our money very wisely at the moment. Luckily, we've made it this far. we've had a bit of a buffer, and well, I won't go into financial details, but we're still here, and I hope we still will be in a few months, and that we can pick it back up. What really needs to happen, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I know, nearly the whole of the hospitality industry is concerned, and a lot of guests and customers as well, is we need to get rid of the 1.5 meter rule, because it's not doable. It's not viable. It's so unnatural for people, and the whole the social aspect, which is such a huge part. I mean, of course, we like to serve good drinks and quality food, but the social aspect is really why we do this. Otherwise, we could have just as well opened a takeaway place and save ourselves all the hassle. Having to keep people apart, it's not doable. It's so unnatural. People are craving a hug. The option to meet someone at a pub and then to say, let's share a table together and continue this conversation we've just struck up. That's not allowed at the moment. And I really think our government is really underestimating the psychological aspect of the whole lockdown, and now this startup again, the 1.5 meter rule. It can't continue on, and it's not continuing. That's quite a frustration on my part. As we can all see, walk into any supermarket or whatever shop, and nobody's keeping their distance anymore. Nobody's social distancing, as it's called now. Masks are mandatory in public transport, but take a bus later on in the evening, 50% aren't wearing a mask. At the same time, we're being policed, and we are threatened with fines of over $4,000 if we, stick to the rules. We don't stick to the rules. The BOAs, the handhaving, the ones who are policing this, were a few days ago going around taking photographs of terraces. Without talking to the staff or the owners or anyone really. They were just going around taking photographs of terraces, and when one of the entrepreneurs here in town kind of ran after them and asked, hey, what are you doing, why are you taking photos of my terrace, they told them they were collecting evidence of terraces they consider to be a risk. I don't think that's a direction we want to be going in this country. And why is the focus so much on bars and restaurants? Why not on the supermarkets? The argument has been made that yes, but you have to be able to go to a supermarket. Sure, but you don't have to be able to go to a clothing shop or a hardware store. It's not all, this is absolute necessity. But they're not being policed, not at all. Not on the streets. Go have a look in the park. There's people sitting together in the park everywhere. And, they should. It's normal. Yet at the same time, we're being threatened with these fines. And a fine that high means automatically that you have a criminal record, which as a bar owner is a huge problem, because with a criminal record, you can't have a liquor license. So, the 1.5 meter rule, huge problem. I would rather have a restriction on the number of people in, and then say a restriction, for example, X amount of people are allowed in for X amount of square footage. That it makes some sense, not 30 meters for our business and 30 meters for a business that is 10 times the size.
That sort of goes back to the normal occupancy ratio.
Exactly. Something like that. But the 1.5 meter rule, it's not doable. We're doing what we can. We're disinfecting everything. Staff are always washing their hands. They're now using hand disinfectants constantly. We're taking all kinds of precautions. But the 1.5 meter rule, it's not sustainable. It's not, and it's not humane, in my opinion. and especially not the way that they're going around it now about it now. Just focusing on us. Just don't think it's quite fair. We've already been hit really hard. We've had to close for 2.5 months. Supermarkets have had peak season. And yeah, no hand having there, no boas in the supermarkets telling people to stay apart in the aisles. So yeah, and also, then we can have a proper gig again, because we are small venues. Downstairs we have the cellar, which is lovely for intimate gigs, but intimate gigs means that you have to be able to, get close to each other. We can't have a full band play there if everybody has to stay a metre and a half apart. I simply don't. Then there's room for, I don't know what, 4 members in the audience, and that's that. And it's been really nice to see how people have been getting really creative. Online initiatives, playing live music online, and it's really nice, but it's a temporary solution. It's not the same, it never will be the same, and it shouldn't be the same. We shouldn't pretend it's the same, it's just not. And it's great how many creative initiatives suddenly arose over the past few months, but we have to be able to get back to the real normality, not what's been called the new normal, because the new normal is not normal.
It's the new abnormal.
Exactly.
Thank you, Faye. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so, without going into a big rant, and that was already edging on it, so no, I don't think so.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Faye.
Thank you.
Big love for you and Phil and all your staff here for everything you have done for everybody here in Haarlem who enjoys coming to the Wolfhound, be it to eat, to drink, to socialize, or to be culturally inspired or take part in that inspiration. And wish you the best.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.